Hello. Welcome to Insights with Dr. Val-Addo. My name is Dr. J. Val-Addo, and today's presentation is the 11th in a series. In our last presentation, we encourage Africans to be proud Africans. And with Europeans, we ask them to be sincere Europeans or Caucasians. And we gathered this from the European historical account of the people in the Guinea coast. And they describe them as people with a unique nature. And we encourage Africans to maintain that. In today's presentation, we want to look at the unique personality of Africans from the writings of these early, sincere European writers. Now, before I go to what they actually wrote, I want to help us understand the relationship between nature and personality. Human nature constitutes several traits, or every human being has several individual traits the person was born with. And it is very hard to change, but it may be modified. Now, Africans, naturally, most Africans are born good. In nature, they are not too depraved. They are not too morally corrupt or defiled. And so we want to look at how this affects their personality. And what do we mean by personality? A personality is a coherent picture of the constitution of an individual person or a group of people. What that means is what constitutes people. It is the distinctive makeup of an individual or a group. And it constitutes the thoughts, the feelings, and actions of that individual person or a group of people. How do they think? How do they express their feelings? And how do they act in response to their thoughts and to their feelings? Now, these three aspects constitute every personality, every individual's personality. And it indicates the inner character of a person which affects the outside behavior. So somebody's behavior outside or conduct is influenced by the inner character. And the inner character is actually dictated by the person's thoughts, his feelings, and his actions. So when these are modified, it can affect the nature of a person. Now, there is the link between personality and human nature. They are inseparable. But like a human nature, an untransformed personality may be corrupt, either lightly or deeply. But when a person's thoughts, a person's feelings, and person's actions are transformed, that person has a different nature. And so it comes from transformation of the personality that will affect the nature of a person. But it will interest my viewers to note that the African is generally a good person, has a good nature, was born naturally with a good nature. And because of that, we have good African personality. Our way of thinking, our feeling, and action, it's not too depraved. It is not something that is defiled. looking at the human nature. So we will prove this from the historical account that the Europeans left us with around 1700s when they traveled to the Guinea coast. They described the personality or personalities of the people of the coastland of the Western and the Central Africa as pleasing personality. The personalities were very pleasing to them. First, they look at the natives or the citizens of the Kingdom of Benin. Now, from Gold Coast or from Ivory Coast, you go to Gold Coast, and they were trading there. From Gold Coast, the next country was Togo, and from Togo, there was the Kingdom of Benin. This is how these early Europeans described them, and I quote, "When the Europeans make them presents, which in their coming thither to trade they always do, they endeavor to return them doubly," unquote. What that means is when these Europeans came to Benin, the Kingdom of Benin, to trade with them on the coast, they will give them presents, they will give them gifts, and then the people will endeavor to return doubly. They will give them double gifts. So they show appreciation. They were very appreciative. And not only appreciative, they return whatever people give to them in double measure. Especially the Europeans, they gave double measure. Now, I'm wearing a beautiful African wax print. My wife went to Liberia some months ago, I don't think it's a year now, and had mission work with them. She did everything to help an educational institution in Liberia work with pastors with crusades. When the programs were over, they presented my wife with African wax print, and then they sent me this shirt, and I'm so happy and so proud about it. They haven't seen me before, they haven't met me before, but because of the appreciation, they sent this to me and said, "Take this to your husband for us, for asking you to come or allowing you to come to stay with us, to work with the school, and also to help us have crusades as part of the mission." So the Africans living south of the Sahara are basically gracious people. They are reciprocal. You give them something, sometimes they give you something back. It may not be in the same measure, but they give you something back. It wasn't only Benin, but along the coastal land south of the Sahara. That is how the nature of the people, the personality of the people, that is their feeling, that is their action. And this comes from very good thoughts that they have, because it's an expression of what is in the thinking and the feeling of the person. Actions are expression of feelings and action and thoughts of a person. So here we see that even up till now, these Liberians have expressed it. You go to Ghana, the same thing. You go to Togo, the same thing. So it's something across the board. That is the nature of the people living in the Guinea coast south of the Sahara. Now, when these Europeans wrote about the historical account or wrote about the people, when they went there face to face with them, this is what they wrote, and I quote, "They represent," that is the natives on the coast of the Guinea, "they represent as sensible, courteous, and fairest traders." So these Europeans who went there saw the Africans as sensible people. They saw them as courteous people. They saw them as fairest traders. This is the personality of Africans. These Europeans described them. Now, let's go to Ivory Coast. They also had trade or commerce with the people of Ivory Coast. And so it was required that they cultivated friendship. The Europeans cultivate friendship with the natives as they trade. But some Europeans wrote something about the character of the then people of Ivory Coast. And from the collection of voyages written by the Europeans, they described the Ivory Coast, the natives of Ivory Coast, in negative terms. They described them, quote, as rude, treacherous people. That's how these Europeans, some of them, describe them in the collection of voyages. So here we have a positive description and a negative description of the same people. One group of Europeans described them as very sensible, very courteous, very nice people along the coast. And then another group of Europeans described them as rude, treacherous people. So we have two competing descriptions. Which one do we take? And thank goodness that this was written for us to decipher. So it's not what people say, but listen, these Europeans, the genuine ones, those who were sincere, those who were truthful, set out to have investigation, set out to investigate what these other Europeans were saying. So they did the investigation, and this was their finding. And he said, quote, the natives, that is the natives of Ivory Coast, were naturally inclined to be kind to strangers with whom they were found of trading. So when they investigated, this was the first finding, that the natives were naturally inclined to be kind to strangers with whom they were found of trading. And then they continued, the frequent injuries done them by Europeans have occasioned their being suspicious and shy, unquote. I want to quote that again. Quote, the frequent injuries done them by Europeans have occasioned their being suspicious and shy, unquote. So these people wrote something negative about them, and thank goodness for Europeans who wanted to know the truth. So they investigated, and they said that people are naturally inclined to be kind to strangers whom they were found of trading. But there were frequent injuries done them by the Europeans, and that occasioned their being suspicious and shy. When they say they were being suspicious, they were suspicious of the Europeans, their behavior, how they maltreated them, how they caused them frequent injuries. So this was how the Europeans were treating these natives. So they became suspicious in their dealing with them. And who wouldn't? Who wouldn't be suspicious? And then what they did was they were being suspicious and shy. The word shy there means that they withdrew, they shunned them. And the natives should be commended for their action. They weren't injurious, they didn't retaliate injury, but they were shy, they shunned them, they were suspicious of them, and so they withdrew, they shunned them. And this is a commended way of dealing with people who were very injurious, people who meted frequent injuries on them. And this was a thoughtful, peaceful reaction. So these true, sincere, and trustworthy European investigators set the record straight. They set the record straight and blamed their own people of the frequent injuries done to the natives. Here we find evidence of intellectual honesty. These Europeans had intellectual honesty to consider, verify, accept the results, and relate to the results from credible Europeans who were eyewitnesses when they were doing the investigation. And so we see some of these Europeans were very, very rude, very crude, very injurious, but there were other Europeans who were very, very honest, and we call that intellectual honesty. So they use their intellectual honesty to consider, verify what actually took place, and they accepted the results, related to the results. Because they were credible people, they actually blamed their people. And so when these native Africans shunned them and they withdrew from them, it was a reaction to the European action. And this cannot even be measured because the Europeans were injurious, but the Africans shunned them. And it wasn't injurious. It was a very thoughtful, peaceful reaction. And I hope you see that. So we see the action of the Europeans, and then we see the reaction of the natives of Ivory Coast. Now, in the previous presentation, I gave you examples of the various ways Europeans maltreated Africans on their own lands. But there were some Europeans who didn't side with them. And I'm not advocating for retaliation or violence, but there is a natural principle of life. And the natural principle of life is sowing and reaping. Whatever you sow, you reap. And there is also the natural principle of action and reaction. Whatever action that you come out with, it shows your personality. So the actions of the Europeans show that their personality and their nature was corrupt because they meted injury upon the Africans. And the reaction of the Africans showed that their feelings and their thoughts was that we will not accept this, but we will not return injury. And so we see the principle of action and reaction. And I want the viewer to judge that the nature and the personality of African, it's better in this very situation. It's good. It's not too depraved, not too defiled. But we see some Europeans whose nature and personality is defiled. Yet we saw another group of Europeans who investigated to know the truth, and their thoughts and their feelings and their actions, which constitute their personality, actually indicate that they were also fine people. So here, we want you to know the principle of sowing and reaping as a natural principle, and the natural principle of action and reaction. And I want you to know that the African personality is refined. It is modified. It is naturally good. Even though they never had all the education that Europe could boast of, God or the Creator had actually modified their personality, and they were good people. They were not too corrupt morally. They were nice African people. So you must know who Africans are generally. They are nice people, gracious people. They are reciprocal, returning good for good. not returning evil for evil, but they will not tolerate abuses, injustices, and injuries. They will find a refined way of avoiding whatever will set their lives back. Whatever will set their existence back, they will find a refined way of reacting to it. And because of that, the African has a destiny in his own hands. In the previous presentation, I told you how the Europeans mistreated Africans. As a pardon, they have that pardon, many of them. Now the same problem is happening to Africans who have traveled to the Arab world. They are being mistreated by Arabs. They are treating them as slaves, especially most Ghanaians who have traveled to the Arab world. We hear the report that these Arabs are mistreating them, maltreating them. And we are using these means to call them to put a stop to it. And I'm calling on the governments of Africa, especially the African Union, to step in to hold these Arabs accountable and, if possible, handle the issue with the United Nations. And if the United Nations will not cooperate, I want to ask the nations of Africa, the governments of Africa, not to allow the embassies of the Arab countries which are mistreating and mishandling Ghanaians and other Africans to close down their embassies and stop the people, their natives, the citizens of these countries from traveling to this Arab world if their governments and countries will not do anything about it. And so this is how we can stop it without retaliation, but we should never allow the citizens of these countries to be maltreated any longer. Years ago, it was the Europeans. Now it is the Arabs in our 21st century. This is uncalled for. This cannot be tolerated. The African nature is not to retaliate, but will not tolerate whatever people do to them. I want to call on us to be proud Africans with true African personality. I want us to preserve the African personality, to preserve it, to make the Creator and the African proud that we have this wonderful personality. In our next presentation, we will look at the African dignity from trustworthy European witnesses who gave these accounts. And so if this presentation has actually been a blessing unto you and it has opened your eyes to the African personality and how people treat us and how we react in a very refined way, give us a thumb up. And also, if you want to continue to receive the insights with Dr. Val-Addo, please click the subscribe button and also click the share button or share symbol and send it to others. And write a comment to us regarding this presentation if you have any. And I want to remind you that the book from which I have taken this, that I have written, is called The Rise of Africans and African Descents to Reign in Life, Volume 1, Redeeming Africa. Africa must be redeemed from some of these issues so that Africa might rise up and African descent might rise up to reign in this life. God bless. And I hope that you will continue to maintain the African personality. God bless.
Is my everything. He